Pillars of Eternity is an isometric role-playing game that was kickstarted and it is developed by Obsidian Entertainment. In this video, I intend to review the game after completing the main campaign on the normal difficulty, which took me around 50 hours. The combat in the game is the standard real-time with pause, party-based combat that you often can find in these kinds of games. You have 6 different characters in your party, and they all have a bunch of skills, spells, and items, and you have to use these wisely to win against the different kinds of enemies. I am not going to pretend to know if the game is balanced or not, but the core of the combat works well enough. But with that said, I do have some issues with the combat though. The pathfinding in the game leaves a lot to be desired. The game does not allow your characters to run through each other. And in my opinion, this is a good thing, since you can use this to block off enemies and so on. I would have preferred it if allied characters could switch places, because it can be a bit annoying when you fight in crowded places and your characters keep on getting stuck into each other. Something far more annoying, though, is that your characters cannot always walk where you, from the visuals, would expect them to be able to walk. And combining this with the pathfinding being in general quite buggy leads to it being quite common for the pathfinding to be quite annoying. Another issue that I have is the large amount of micromanagement that you have to do. The party AI is extremely basic, and they will, for example, not continue attacking after using a skill. And this means that you have to do a very large amount of micromanagement just to have your party performing the most basic stuff. And this would not be a big deal if not for the fact that there is a very large amount of combat in this game against trash enemies. If the game expects me to micro all the time, then I expect the game to deliver encounters worth microing in, and not simply throwing the same trash mobs at me over and over again. And this made the combat feel quite boring and slow, in my opinion. And it certainly doesn't help that you do not get experience from the normal combat, and that, in general, the mobs rarely drop anything worth talking about. Another thing that I reacted to is that the game limits the amount of times you can use most spells and skills before resting. Now I can see how this makes sense in a game where resting supplies are limited or rare. But in this game, you can simply go and get more resting supplies, or even rest in your own castle. So it doesn't really fit the game. And for me, it became more of an annoyance, since I did not want to use up all of the cool skills and then have to backtrack to the castle or get more resting supplies. So what I did was that I simply used the boring per encounter stuff to fight all of the trash mobs. And this certainly didn't help the combat getting more interesting. My last complaint about the combat is that at times it can be kind of hard to see what is going on when there is a large amount of units fighting very close to each other. And overall, even though the combat is competent, at least for me, it grew kind of stale and boring before the game was over. Visually, the game has some quite nice looking environments, but the characters and the combat animations looks quite basic. I did enjoy that you can toggle the HUD on or off with some button presses. Too few games, in my opinion, have this kind of feature. During the game, your characters will develop by leveling up and getting new items. The max level is 12 and my party reached the level 10. That means that I leveled up 9 times during 50 hours, which means that in average it took me 5.5 hours to level up. I think that it is kind of fun to develop my character, and I would have preferred it if I was able to level up with a bit higher frequency than the game did allow me to. There is a fair number of different items in the game. A lot of the items are quite samey though, and a few have interesting effects. You also get a load of trash items, and in the early game especially, the item progression is really slow, since you for the most part only get the same trash items over and over again. Inventory management is something that often can be quite annoying in role-playing games. In Pillars of Eternity, though, they have solved this problem by removing inventory management altogether. So you have a stack with infinite size, and you can access this stack from everywhere. Now, I don't hate this feature, but I must wonder, would this feature truly be needed if they just removed all of the trash items that they keep on throwing at you? I ended up with a silly amount of trash items in my stash after a while. Pillars of Eternity uses a new attribute system. Now, I'm not going to claim to know whether or not it is balanced or not, but I did find it a bit hard to understand without reading a guide, and I would prefer it if they made the attribute system a bit more intuitive. Attributes like strength and constitution and dexterity, without knowing the numbers below, you can still get a feeling what they do. But attributes like resolve and might, it is not as easy to understand what they are all about. This game is very number heavy under the hood, and I must wonder if this complexity is needed or not. And at many times I found myself that there is so much information hidden from you that it can be hard to properly figure out which items are better and so on. Let's say, for example, that we have two different weapons with different damage and different attack speed. To properly tell which weapon is better, we need to know the exact attack speed. But the game does not tell you. It simply describes the attack speed as being average and fast. Well, we can't use this to say anything. So that is one example of the game hiding information from you. Now, I'm not saying that you can't find this information. I'm sure you can. You can Google it and you can perhaps look it up in some codex or whatever. But should you really have to do that? The story of the game is kind of a mixed bag. I found the basic setting to be really interesting. Children are being born without souls, and people are, of course, looking for someone to blame. And I thought that this setting was extremely interesting because it does not only make you understand, but even sympathize with people who take drastic and extreme actions to try to solve this problem. And I would have preferred it if the plot spent more time on developing this idea and the different factions' opinion on this. And they do spend some time with this, but at a certain point in the plot, it ends up focusing more on religion and different gods and overall at the lore of the world and so on. This is, of course, very subjective, but I am not all that interested in a lore-heavy god discussion the first time I enter a new fantasy setting. I do not believe that the main plot is bad, but I did not find it very interesting, and overall I found it lacking in interesting characters and factions. Perhaps they should have waited with the lore-heavy religion discussion for at least a couple of games. The companion stories that I explored were quite interesting. None of them were amazing, in my opinion, but I enjoyed them. This is something very vague, but I found the companions lacking in the whole party feeling area. I found no romance options and very little in terms of friendship building. There are some party banter at times, but I would have liked it to be like there to be a bit more casual companion interaction to make it feel more like a party of friends, so to say. This is, of course, a very subjective opinion, but if you only interact with your companions when you discuss serious, lore heavy topics, then it kind of feels like they're only there for the exposition, so to say, and not for you to develop some kind of friendship or relationship in the game. I'm not saying that the game completely lacks this, because that's not the case, but I would have wished for there to be more of it. So, what is my conclusion about the game? Well, overall, I found Pillars of Eternity to be a decent enough role-playing game. However, to be perfectly honest, I did have to force myself to finish the game, since I grew kind of bored of both the combat and the story a couple of hours before completing the game. And in the third act, I did not complete all of the side quests and stuff like that. And that was my opinion on the game. If you have gotten this far, then thank you for watching, and bye bye.